All right, everyone, looks like we're live. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be hailing from. Welcome to SolariseCon, a day of global conversation on solarpunk, an art and activist movement, a subgenre of speculative fiction in which humanity has addressed climate change and made progress towards creating a more sustainable and equitable world. I'm Steph, I'm your moderator for the first panel on real solarpunk technology. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, a design and research specialist, and a long-time activist for an open, interoperable, accessible, and user-friendly World Wide Web. Before I invite my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to take a quick moment to tell you what the program is like for the day and just divulge some quick housekeeping details. Each panel will last for about an hour and a half, and there will be a 15-minute break in between panels. The first hour or so will typically have a focused conversation, after which the panelists will address audience questions. So unfortunately, we do have a technical limitation, which means we can only pick up questions from YouTube comments. So please ask the questions there. Each panel will have a different link or URL to the stream. So in the description and comment section of this stream, there will be a link to the next session. Otherwise, you can also find it on the Eventbrite page for the event today. Today's event is live streamed to YouTube, PeerTube, as well as directly to 3 physical locations: Fishing Fortress Science Fiction Academy in Chongqing, China, Bookstore Cavo della Ladra in Milan, Italy, the Polytechnic University of Turin, or Politecnico di Torino in Italy. All streams are recorded and will be available on respective platforms pretty much immediately afterwards. We will have 4 panels of writers, activists, makers, academics, and artists who have generously agreed to join us to share their expertise, experiences, and perspectives. We are seeking to tackle some tough questions today, addressing the nuances of what role technology, energy, art, and narrative might play in the solarpunk now that will take us into a positive solarpunk future. So I would like to now invite my panelists to introduce themselves. I'm very, very glad that they are here. And Star, would you like to go first? You're just right at the top of my window.
Oh, so hi, my name is Ngei, and I am Kenyan but based in Poland, and I am an activist educator focusing on technology and its impact in society, mostly talking about how the global north and the global south can work together with technology. And I am also an educator, and I concentrate on open source and mesh networks.
Barbara, would you like to go?
So hi, I'm based in Copenhagen, so same time zone as Star, I think. I call myself a Swiss knife. I work with a lot that are usually in the niche of some form of change making. It used to be mostly libraries, and now I work with on the topic of manufacturing. I'm going to talk more about that. Also a parent and a partner and an activist, Rebellion and some other organizations. So that's me.
Thank you. Martin, please go ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Martin. I'm Colombian, but I'm based in Brazil, in São Paulo. I'm the founder of Educator, and our work is mostly based in empowering people as creator to apply technologies and innovation into their own needs. And yeah, we mostly act in Educator as facilitators of that processes and helping teams, organizations, communities to empower their people to create solutions for their needs. So yeah, it's a pleasure to join today for this technology Solarpunk panel.
Thank you, everyone. So let me just set the scene a little bit for our audience. So solarpunk has a strange affair with technology. There are solarpunks who would reject it and think we should go back to a simpler time. But on the other hand, I also know solarpunks who see the technology as utterly fundamental to help us attain a better, a vision of a better future. But technology is such a loaded word, in my opinion. In its simplest sense, technology is just synonymous with the application of practical knowledge. The word has different meanings throughout the ages. For example, once upon a time, the sharp point of an obsidian shard that could be fashioned into a spear was, strictly speaking, a technology. And given where we're today, technology can mean anything from robotics, artificial intelligence. Please note that I do make a difference between the two. We can talk about nuclear fusion, bioluminescent fungi, and I'm sure our audience can fill in the blanks for more examples. But one of the notions we have in Solarpunk is also to better understand what we already have, which includes re-examining indigenous wisdom with fresh eyes and a renewed sense of wonder. So I guess I'd like to start with thinking about the technology we have today. And, and my question for our panelists, in terms of Solarpunk ethos, which underrated technology can you tell us about that's in use today? And maybe, if you like, also, why do you think it's been underrated? Could I ask Barbara to kick us off, if that's all right?
Yeah, I have like two levels of answer for that. The first underrated technology, I would say, is all of the very low-tech technology that's out there. Everything that we think is not as interesting as the next new thing. So that goes for any woodworking material, metal work, sewing machines, etc. Like these are the machines that produce the vast majority of items that people have needed up till recently and still continue to do so, especially when global supply chains collapse. Examples of that are the emblematic example of face masks and cloth masks during the peak and beginning of the pandemic. But it's also like feature phones. Like we keep wanting to do the next new thing with smartphones, but there are a lot of people in locations that have very low connectivity that are just using their SMS service. And there's so much that can be done with that and an SD card. That's like one layer. I would say the infrastructure of what's already out there that is underused and underrepresented in all of the technical strategies that are out there. And then the other, maybe it's going to sound weird, the other underrated technology, I would say, is the internet. Like we keep talking about the next new website or the next new app, but like the internet itself, the really somewhat boring data protocols like HTTPS and the World Wide Web, basically, the fact that we still use the same thing as when it was initially designed, and that we all plug right the technology. I feel like I keep reading about like the new cool tool instead of the new cool web. So that I think that's a really important focus that I would have.
Martin, would you like to go next and tell us what you think is underrated?
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question because we usually say, okay, this technology is underrated, this technology is overrated. And for me, what makes the point for a technology to go to the masses, is basically the adoption barrier. Because usually technologies borns in an innovation trigger, borns in a lab, borns in some context where people are creating this technology, and and we know for sure that technology is the answer, but what is the question we usually say, and the question is how this technology solves human needs, planetary needs, are the point of absolutely adoption, going from barriers also to democratize, to give access, to give inclusion, to give inclusion, and also to make sense of, for example, a common consumer use the technology. But on that way, we also shape the vision of what people can do with that technology. Maybe they can fix the technology, they can reuse, maybe they can turn this technology into something bigger. So on that way, the adoption is super important because we go from the innovation trigger. Usually a technology goes from the peak of inflated expectations. Usually people say, okay, this technology could do a lot of things and will save the world and will change everything, is the most disruptive part. But what really happens is that most of technologies go throw of disillusionment, and many technologies disappear, and basically some of that technologies changes and create new technologies. Some technologies that maybe goes to the life in a very early space, maybe they don't go beyond, but they maybe disappear, but they also transform. And I think the point of bring a technology to the people, and also to use that technology, is the slope of enlightenment, maybe, and go into absolutely the productivity that is basically the adoption, the use, and the integration in our day-by-day lives. So I think the technologies have all that challenges, and maybe the time, maybe the ways that we go to give the appropriate and the appropriation are the keys to go from the underrated and to get the maximal potential of the technologies to use in the day-by-day life.
I have questions on that one, but I'll ask Star to continue first before we come back and sort of dive deep into that point.
Okay, so for me, I think underrated technology is the technology that is not considered disruptive enough. And so it's not going to be the next big thing, and it will never grow beyond the very localized problem that it's trying to solve. And I'm with Barbara with the SIM card, and the phone is really an underrated technology. And I have a good example from Kenya about how this simple technology has been implemented and has changed a lot of lives. And I don't know if, people know about M-Pesa. M-Pesa is a mobile-based, decentralized banking technology where you don't have to have a bank, but you can have a mobile wallet with just your SIM card, simple phone, no internet needed, and you have like person-to-person money transfer. You can pay for anything everywhere in Kenya, be it the government. You can also, send it to the bank and withdraw it from the bank if you want, if you have a bank account. And this combined with something very cultural, because people do a lot of communal helping. So in this, it was tied in with this financial tech, something very simple that's called chamas. Chamas are a group of around 10 to 30 people, members of a community who come together, pool their resources, and from there they can give loans, or they can give a certain amount to a member. And this is something that is very community based. And they do send money with M-Pesa, and that helps the growth. And from the community base of this, people have this social cohesion where they do not have predatory outlook to each other, and they're not just a financial kind of support system. It's also because of the cultural value and the mutual support system that comes. It just brings about a really big impact in the community as they grow together. They help each other socially. At home, they tend to be friends. And so there's this whole community that is built around this very, very simple, you can say, kind of technology and social based application of the technology, to a point where a lot of banks are trying to get people to join them based on this very thing that started as very simple by some women in some village who wanted to help each other.
That's an amazing story. Thank you, Star. And I'm fascinated by what all of you have said. Like it's almost as if what's working well right now is what we are using, and it's invisible to us because we're using it. And are we taking it for granted? Do you think that's a fair thing to be saying? Like those of us who are accessing the internet, having a SIM in our phone, is that what you all feel, that we are taking it for granted? Barbara, I'm going to ask you because you look like you're thinking
Yeah.
about to say.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think it's this generalized symptom of we keep. Sorry, this was mentioned at the launch of the one before last IPCC report. Like, we keep looking for the next new fix that will fix everything. So this is just the same symptom as a whole bunch of other sectors, and it's the typical. The solutions are already here. What we really need is for those solutions to be better network, for people to be easy to access and to connect. So the examples Star was giving is like, you have an existing societal structure. How do we plug what's already in there to what emerging or existing technology is here? And do you mind if I share just a visual? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. And I will make sure that we can see
Let's
it.
see if this works. Share, and then this, and then, whoops. Why is it? Ah, there it is. Okay, entire screen. Share. Cool. So if I transition this entire thing, basically, right now, what we have is an entire world in which people can build things everywhere. But yet we keep insisting on shipping things from one centralized location by plane or by boat to where they are needed. And this is because we have like this one solution, which is we can produce things faster and faster and faster. Let's ship them further and further and further away, rather than a thought of what do we have that's already there and how do we connect it better. So I coordinate the Internet of Production, and the idea is, well, if instead of looking for one solution, let's look at creating flows between those different manufacturing locations. So if you imagine each of these little locations, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but like what the internet did for information, it didn't reinvent people taking photos or making films or sharing stories. What it did was it created a web for everybody to share these information points. The next new, or like, digital money doesn't reinvent the fact that there's a social structure of people trying to support each other financially. It just creates a digital web between that. So what we have with an Internet of Production, for example, and I'm sure that's applicable to other sectors than manufacturing, is that we work, the focus being on a global knowledge, global designs, global ways of doing things, global ways of manufacturing things. It's just shared digitally to what's already out there. And your question was like, do we underrate things? Yes, we completely underrate looking what's already there and connect it, rather than trying to find a new thing to put out there. Definitely think that's an issue.
Thank you for their example. That's really interesting. I'm just wondering if Martin or Star, have you got an example local to you or local to the communities that you know that have more or less succeeded in trying to model what Barbara was talking about? Do we actually have good examples on that kind of local but global knowledge sharing, local production and global knowledge sharing?
Yeah. Well, a lot of my examples will come from Africa and Kenya, because that's where I'm from and that's what I understand. And I would say with this, there's this thing called SACCOs in a lot of African countries, which is, let me confirm I have the name. I will send the full sort of like what the letters sound from, but basically it's a way for to make the people who are producers, the people who actually work and do something, like the farmers, to come together and, get rid of the middleman and basically form this cohesive group of people who decide for themselves what they're going to make, where they're going to send it. And it has brought about this movement of it brings about, let's say, 43% of the GDP in Kenya, with people just coming together and sort of like going, okay, we need to empower each other. We need to accept that this is, well, a capitalistic world, but we can control how we move goods. We can control how it affects us as a community and how we can get away from being exploited. And so I think that might be a close example to what Barbara was talking about.
Okay, So when I see the map that Barbara shared, the first thing that comes to my mind is for sure knowledge and also empowerment to give access to technologies that could have global knowledge supporting that technology and local building appropriating that technology and for sure building over that. And there are, I think, many examples also related to the open source approach and also to technologies that have that open access to be built. And for me, an example of this is how you give knowledge and access to the ways of building and also give local ways to build that technology and to maintain that technology, but connected with that global knowledge layer. So, for example, yeah, we see in the pandemics a lot of examples of that. For example, building healthcare technologies based in a global knowledge, building over that, but going to locally build that technologies and maintain that technologies. So yeah, I think that connection of shared resources and knowledge could be also the resource.
So I want to move a little bit forward into the future now that we've talked about the now. I want to know, if your vision or your thinking about technology could play a role in a solarpunk society in the near future. I feel like in some ways you've already touched on that, Barbara, with just this concept of local production and sort of global knowledge. Maybe the interesting part will be focusing on why are we not doing it? So, like, what do we need to do in order to get to that vision? Maybe I don't know. Anybody could say.
It's actually. Oh, I'm happy to. Okay. Yeah. I can see there's been a question on intellectual property rights and things like that. So that will also be linked. I think there are two elements. One is that we're almost there, but some things are complicated. Like all of our grand visions of what a future would look like with this greater commons, greater exchange of knowledge, greater exchange of open source designs, or not open source, but just easy. So an example of not open source or not open data would be, all the different manufacturers that are out there, the small companies that have made their design. Their designs are not necessarily open, but just being able to know that they're there to respond to a pandemic or just to respond to a need, that is still key. And these layers of exchange and data protocols, they're complicated. It's taken us 30 years to get there with the internet, and it's going to get there. It's going to take just as much to do that for health and for manufacturing, etc. And it's not very sexy funding wise. Like you'd rather fund like a new specific item, the new silver bullet, as someone said. But another thing that we need to get there is that I don't know how familiar some of you are with the notion of donuts economics that Kate Raworth has been mentioning. She's an economist. We live in a world where like the capitalist point of view is pretty much the main way of thinking about how to get from one point to another point. Like we need something, then we're going to produce and commercialize it with a patent or an intellectual property, etc. But the thing is, a lot of what we need to get to this interconnected capacity of all things we've mentioned so far, a lot of that rests in commons. A lot of that rests in the private data that people have of the designs that they've created, or the information, like from their passport to their birth certificates, like all of these items that we own. Currently, the only way of thinking about how to get to 1.1, point to point B is to think, okay, how can I monetize this? But to get to a solarpunk future, we need to get beyond this notion of market value and think much more broadly, like how can we exchange this, barter this, put it in a common, how can this work from, again, start your example of like social networks. And so I would say that to get to that point, for technology as for everything, we need to take a step back as to how this can be embedded in the society that we live in. So, for example, creating teams and alliances that work on developing some data protocols. I was also thinking that, basically, we can't just keep thinking of how do we gate this into a solution that can then be monetized, one of the items, but we're going to need to think beyond that if we want to get to a future as radical as what Solarpunk imagines. And conversely, I would say that people who are creating Solarpunk narratives, we need them to show us what that world looks like, because it will inspire us on how we can get there.
That's a really interesting point right at the end there, Barbara. And thank you for basically telling us we need to have that discussion in our fourth panel at the end of the day today on narrative. And I'm just curious to know, so now we're focusing on sort of this kind of vision. Is there an alternative one? Could we, if it's not only, if that's one model, the idea of this local production, global knowledge, are there other models of how that we might move forward in terms of tech? Or are we almost exclusively tied in with the problem of patents, intellectual property, and monetization? Oh, both of you are smiling. I don't know who to pick. Star, would you like to take this up? Oh, Martin? Okay, so it's Martin.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think what can we do? Yes, and what could be built that and how could build a right ecosystem also to give access to that knowledge, also to create an educational approach to appropriate people also with that knowledge and start building in a sustainable way improvements to the technology and also share the discoveries that we are having. So I think it's a part of to create that ecosystem, also build locally the opportunity to experiment that technologies and to over the experimentation learn, try and build local particularities, because there is not a technology that fits overall. Maybe we can see very closely the context of each community, the needs that the resources that they have access, and maybe things that we see they are very disruptive in one context, maybe they are not in other contexts. Yeah, maybe for the local needs that a community could have in Brazil, maybe have access to water is the basic and the most disruptive technology that they can have. And maybe for other communities, there are other layers. But that's an important maybe differentiation, and also build locally the capacities and maybe the culture to nurture this. And what's that culture? A culture of experimentation, a culture of curiosity, a culture of knowledge sharing, a culture also to think in a distributed way. And I think maybe the first step that we could go beyond is create that local capacities and local cultures, and absolutely empowering the people with the knowledge, the resources, but understanding that every context matter, every context is different, and maybe we need to understand first of all what is the local narrative. For example, in Brazil, we worked in some years ago in a fisherman's community, and we created on that community something called the apiarios, that are basically like schools, like a hub, like a co-working space, like a hacker space, but in a community, not in a big city, but in a fisherman's community. And what basically we do on that context, we first of all understand what's the narrative, what's the local narrative, because we have technologies that could solve many problems, but what are the needs, the local needs that this community have? We understand, for example, that fishing is the line of connection, is the resource, is the narrative, is the local culture. So we start understanding around the fishing practice what was the needs. And for example, we understand that they have many middlemen that buys the fish in the price they want. And the families and the fishermen tell us they pay all what they want, and how to remove that. And we start with the youngsters in the community to try to create something. And basically what was created was an e-commerce platform that enabled fishermen to sell directly to restaurants and curing the middleman, and building also cooperatives, I think, and the cooperativism as the way to maintain that technology, to maintain that local culture happening, and also improving them and making some structure. I think that's another important thing, how to build that infrastructures, that ways to manage and that support the innovations and technologies that we are adopting and that we are maintaining. So yeah, that's some points about some ideas about how to do that.
That's so interesting, the fact that we have other issues to consider. How do we sustain that knowledge through education? How we and make sure that the technology ties very closely to local identity, culture, and narratives. I know Barbara has something that you want to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon that because from what I've seen, especially in the artistic depiction of Solarpunk is really good at imagining this notion of food production by everybody, everywhere, where it's needed, depending on what climate you're at. The picture will always seem really culturally relevant, and everybody seems to be somehow involved, and there are thriving local markets and things like that, right? Which is, it feels so obvious for food. And what Martin is describing, like innovation, local specificities, networks, communities around this, that we're just applying this to making things or providing health services, etc. And there's a quote I read while I was doing some research for trying to explain why manufacturing also needs to be local. There's a person that said that we don't need food security, we need food sovereignty, because we could be food secure in jail. And that applies to manufacturing, and it applies to measuring the weather because of climate change and being able to measure weather forecast. It applies to getting the right tools where you need them. It applies to healthcare. Like that notion of we don't just need access to things, we need sovereignty over them. And again, I'm echoing what Martin was saying, but this goes through, like, to be able to imagine a Solarpunk world in which this is possible. It's the same as for food. It goes through just more diffuse capacity to do all of these things. So to get there, which is what we were talking about, like right now we live in a world where we're divided between the people who can make things but that can't afford them, and the people who buy things but don't have the capacity to make them because they don't have the time or they don't have the skills. So we hear this a lot, even from the innovation, like Silicon Valley kind of thoughts, like we need more coders, but we need more everything. Like, sorry, we don't need more everything. We need people to be more capable of many things, like technically, physically, intellectually, or skill-wise. And I wanted to give a shout out to, I saw at the beginning, there are people from Rhino Camp, refugee settlement in Uganda, and really to people in refugee camps all over the world. Like, I used to work for Libraries Without Borders, and I've seen like all the vocational training that takes place in refugee camps. People are stuck in there from like 4 to 60 years, like their entire life. Very often, the average time you spend in a refugee camp is 17 years. So like basically your entire educational life. And you know what? Like people there can make the things. However, you have the right design of the and the usual design of the refugee camp in terms of like delivery of everything, and then people are left with nothing to do, no sense of empowerment, and also really badly adapted things like buckets that shipped around the world before they arrive to where they are needed. you can make things there. So yeah, this diffuse sense of skills, and the notion that it's not just about meeting needs, it's about meeting needs for yourself. And again, it's not just the individual, it's the entire like market, like the companies, the investors, all of that exists in each ecosystem.
Thank you. Steph, did you have further things you wanted to add? No? Okay. Before I shift the conversation a little bit, I am intrigued by the notion of needs. Because so from my own personal experience as somebody as sort of a design research specialist, and one of the things that we do is to try and identify needs in order to to be able to help people there. I think I know probably like maybe Star or Martin would have these thoughts. What could we do better in making sure we understand local needs? Like, are there things that you would recommend that we think about as a process, or as a sort of like, Martin, I know you used the word design thinking. How is that relevant here, and how can we use these skills more in these contexts? Maybe Star, do you want to go first?
Okay, well, in terms of recognizing needs, I'm going to say something very obvious. Talk to people in the community that you want to help. Ask them what do they want, what do they need, and then work with them to come up with solutions for it, and to shop around for things that they can do and how their needs can be met. Often, usually, especially when it comes to the global south countries and the so-called developing countries, usually there's this system where the West comes with a solution, and they're like, this is what is the solution, we will implement it in your community, without asking, okay, is this actually solving something that you actually need to be solved, and is it useful to you? So you end up having situations where there's all these new flashy things that have been brought, and people just have no idea whatsoever what they're doing, and also they feel like they're not being listened to. So I would say you just have to work with the community. You have to find out, what resources do you have, what can you do, how can you bring this, or will you learn from some other community, will you go and try to work with other people? And I think that's a very good way of knowing just what to do and what the community needs.
That's beautiful. What did you say? Start listening. That's the first step. Active listening, and to do absolutely active observation on what is happening, understanding what are the needs, and maybe building on that process a vision on what are the desirable. And with that desirable, something that is usually beautiful when you project needs on time is to build the utopia. That's also the power that the Solarpunk has in building and materializing all that desires, all that needs, and expand that needs in a way to see our world with this happening. But we understand that we have a path to go on that direction, and we need to come back to the present and give consistent steps on the direction of our utopia. And for sure, the utopia may change, and absolutely they are not fixed. Maybe new desires and new ways also to achieve that needs come back. And we redesign and we redefine also our narrative. For that reason, narratives and Solarpunk and real world are very connected, because the narrative is also the way to give us purpose, to give us action, and to go on that direction. But absolutely to discover what needs to be solved, more than solutions, we need to make more questions. make beautiful questions, to understand what is the problem, but also understand what are the root causes of the problem, to not being just in the visible layer of the iceberg, but to try to go down to understand what are the relations, and also to apply maybe a systematic thinking, a systems thinking approach to see how your solution will be part of that context, and maybe how you can understand that maybe it's a complex problem. We are facing many complex problems and facing many multidimensional problems in our sorry, a plane passing here, but many multidimensional problems that have not single root causes, and maybe there is no single answers and solutions for that. So understand that multidimensionality through the lenses of the systems thinking, the complexity, or many other lenses that we have today, to build not maybe building a part of the solution, but understanding the macro. So maybe build the micro, but understand the macro. For the first step, for sure, is here, active listening, make the right questions, and also to discover what is the job that usually that solution will bring to the community. And the job passes absolutely to discover needs, but also to discover motivations that people have under that situation, desired outcomes that they are looking for, and absolutely work with, or maybe approach to the context and approach to the problem with a learner mindset, not the specialist's mindset. Because when we approach maybe thinking that we have a lot of solutions, we create bias in our view that could not let us understand what's the right problem to solve, and what are the needs, and what are the definitions. So resume, invest huge time understanding the problem, understanding the context. And maybe Einstein says, if you have 1 hour to solve a problem, spend maybe 55 minutes understanding the context, understanding the problem, and 5 minutes building the solutions. So I think that both parts and will be consistent parts to keep building and nurturing the human and the planetary needs.
Thank you, everyone. In the next, well, I'll say 15 minutes or so, I want to ask the big question before we take some of the questions and answers. When I look up the word technocracy, my dictionary says the government or control of society or industry by an elite of technical experts. And without saying its antithesis to the sort of the existence and the idea of solarpunk, and yet I want to say that that's still the world we live in right now. From your perspectives, how do we work towards a future where we can coexist with these technologies, whether they're the ones that we have, whether they're the ones that we will develop, without falling risk to having sort of the top-down control by elites, by technical experts, by probably more noticeably corporates? Who would like to take that one first?
I could. I would say, for me, we would have to have like a more community-based technology, and have communal places where tech is created, modified, repaired, people educated about technology and how it works, and remove this whole magicness about how things are. And these places like, maker spaces, hacker spaces, fab labs, and biolabs, when people actually come together and do something, either scientific or just sharing knowledge. And in this way, you have this, you don't have too much of asymmetry of knowledge, where there are people who know everything, and then there are people who know nothing, and they're just being told what to do, how to do it, and they just, technology is controlling their life. They have no say in it, and it's not a tool to them. So I would say just allowing people to be involved in the whole process, of technology and putting a lot of things that to be understandable to the layperson, not just using big words and then, flowery, nano, quantum, whatever words you're going to throw at things, and people don't know what that is. So having this sort of like communal technology process, I think will be good at least mitigating technocracy.
Barbara?
Sure. So, like, there's first of all, there's the issue with the technocracy. If I take the technology angle and I ask myself, what leads to a technocracy? Part of it is an underlying problem with the value system. So somebody said it earlier, but the world is full of technologies that, when they were created, were going to be the next liberating thing. From sharing economy apps and softwares to the internet itself that is reinforcing all the biases. Like, we have teams of usually very imaginative, innovative people who want to do a grand thing that's going to save the world. But then this technology comes out in a world where the value-based system encourages it to go towards reinforcing the problems that already exist. So since with Solarpunk we can imagine a leap from that, I would say that one of the leaps or one of the shifts is to shift the value system. And a member of the alliance that I was asking this question to, he suggests the thoughts that, well, technology today works in bad faith, in the sense that the technology that you use is not designed to do the thing that you think it's going to do. So, for example, health data apps monetize your data, not provide a service for your health. Self-driving cars collect data because one day it will be useful, or today it is useful because local authorities want it for good or bad reasons. Companies want it for monetizing reasons. I do think that has its purpose, but the entire system is embedded on bad faith, as in, like, technology is out there to find a way to get you to use money so that it can use it in another way. But there is, in a Solarpunk technology, one would need to make an assumption, whatever the technology is in that scenario, in that story, in that picture, of an assumption of good faith. Wikipedia is only there to enable you to access knowledge. Like, its sole purpose, and when you're reading this, you are getting exactly the service that you expect to be receiving. As far as I've seen in a makerspace, when you go in, the machines that are there are only there to provide you the service of enabling you to make something. So if we look at the underlying values that would build a non-technocratic Solarpunk future, is that whatever that technology, what we need to get there is ensuring that the vast majority of the technology that's being used out there is being used on this principle of good faith. And how we do that, you were talking about, like, community technology emergence, or like community design of what is out there in technology. We mean so many things with technology, so it requires a couple of examples. But so there is the community part, there's the governmental part. At the European level, there's all the efforts around GDPR, because it's been identified that data is being extracted from European citizens and citizens around the world. And GDPR is a set of legal frameworks that codify how that data can be extracted. That's also the how do we not end up in a technocracy? It's taking those kind of ideas and running with them. I have no idea how we reach a system in which there is a communal development and curation and caretaking of the important things, like people's data, people's designs, people's important documents. They're in from their birth certificates to who they got married to. Like, if all of us hold on to these as personal and decide to trade it or not, like, you can imagine completely different futures. You can even imagine futures in which a society that is technocratic versus the society that isn't, and how that plays out. And again, you can use the metaphor of food systems to help make those leaps in the mind. If I'm not personally an expert on these questions, but I go back to the food analogy regularly, like a centralized system where there's a division between consumers and owners versus a collective one in which people are consumers and traders and owners and communal shares and have all of these different facets and how they're using it. So yeah, different value system and governmental or communal legal frameworks to run these.
Right. I think the autocracy, and maybe understanding what is the autocracy absolutely, and what happens when someone have huge control of a technology that will give them the power also to do what they want with that technology, and this comes to me in a word that is healthy. How to build healthy technologies that absolutely integrates in that healthy concept the principles that we want to follow into the building of that technologies. When we say, for example, the internet and how the net neutrality today is being and is facing challenges, and we come back also to the healthy principle that the technologies, for example, should be neutral. Maybe that technologies should be unbiased, and if we create the conditions to build technology that have not that problems, for sure we are building healthy ecosystems. Healthy because it's ethical, and we have an approach to that technology to materialize our beliefs, being inclusive, being accessible, being open, being secure. And maybe all that dimensions will start to bring us conditions and characteristics that for sure the technology should have, and go beyond the technocracy, on the authority, on the autocratic approach of a couple of billionaires owning the technology. So we need to build that, and also to give control to the people to build their own and to maintain that technologies and to build over that, because that will separate the relation of the producer to the consumer and also to the billionaire creating the technologies and all the people submitted to that technology. So give ownership of the technologies, give control to the technologies to the people, create a healthy ecosystem also to over that principles, create the new era of solutions that we want to build, and maybe to avoid on that way to try to avoid the autocracy, or better, giving the control to the people over the things, over the ways to change the technology to their own needs, their own technologies, and to see also opportunities in the extremes, when, for example, particular needs or particular specific, because we usually see technology as a thing that maybe could fits all, but understand the ways that in context and in particular situations you need to adapt is super important. So include the right to repair, the right to reuse, the right to remix, all that have maybe healthy conditions that will help us to fight the autocracy.
Thank you. And in the spirit of not inventing a new thing and things we have taken for granted, the idea of the commons have been with us since the very early days of civilization, and it's amazing that we don't use it more. I want to thank our panelists for all your thoughts, ideas. There's so much food for thought in here. I know that I'll be coming back to watch a recording again just to, just take apart what we've just said. I think that we should make some time for questions. And as far as I can tell, there's been about quite a lot of questions. And so I want to say thank you everybody for your comments. As we were talking to each other, it's hard for us to follow everything. I know that some of us are trying to read at the same time, and appreciate your participation and your engagement here with the conversation. I will ask questions, not necessarily in the order they're posted, but I think the first one that I would like to say is, Star wanted to answer this question first, which is, I think if I just do that, would that work? For Star, what you've just described is that somewhat of a workers' cooperative structure, but with the wider community, not just the workers involved. And I think that this was coming back to your very first example, Star.
Oh yes, I think I will expound a bit more on what I said, because I just mentioned some things and kind of like ran through them. So the SACCOs that I was talking about, the SACCO, as it is that which is both a workers' union, and through it being a workers' union, it also helps with the wider community, because you know the local people, they work together to do this, because it's the people who are doing the same thing and happen to be in the same community. And it came about fast because they needed to be competitive with the big companies that were coming in and basically taking over production and raw materials and agriculture. And also because unfortunately the government sometimes does very little to help people, and people have to empower themselves. That's why a lot of the innovations and technologies in Kenya and parts of Africa are very sort of like ground up, because they have to be. And so this were made so that they can, one, compete with the companies, to make sure that the workers who are doing the work are actually the people who are getting it, to make sure that the money can be reinvested in the community, because they just don't take the money and go home and that's it. They do a lot of investment into the community, helping people who cannot either work or were struggling, and basically lift each other from poverty. And it is, in a way, it's very culturally based for us. We come from a history of doing this kind of thing. And this is why I say, you have to do something that works with your society, that works with your culture. Because maybe this can work very well with Kenyans, but then it's not going to work very well in another place. And also, I also mentioned M-Pesa, and I did not uh, make a comment on that, and someone had some question. It is also something that came about because of, like I said, having to do things ground up. The banks were unwilling to work with individuals who did not have a lot of money. They just refused to lend money. They refused to give the services to people who were considered, too little to do it. And that's why this became a big thing. Your grandmother in the village doesn't need a bank account. They just have a phone and they can receive and send money. And this is also one of those things that I said, it's innovation, because you really have to innovate here. There's nothing there, and you kind of have to help yourselves to do it.
And that structure for M-Pesa, is it a workers' co-op as well, or is it a wider community? How does that structure work?
Well, unfortunately, it's centralized in a way, because it was introduced by Safaricom. It's one of the mobile network companies. But what it allows for mostly is being able to just, however much money you want, you can send it, you can buy things with it. It's more aimed towards the peer-to-peer kind of financial thing, which I think a lot of like Bitcoin or whatever people are trying to implement. And it's ready technology that's there. And so it's not a workers union, unfortunately, there are banks that people make, SACCOs can actually, they do their own banking, and each SACCO acts like its own bank. So there is that.
Thank you. So there's a question here that has come from PeerTube that our tech admin has very helpfully picked up for us. Can we talk about the idea of how solarpunk technologies can support improvement in social well-being, resolution social and economic problems, or sort of poor local socioeconomic? So I guess I got cut off there, but I think it's the concept of how can we think about solarpunk tech as a way to improve social well-being at that scale. I don't know, but who would like to take this one? Martin?
I can say something about this, but I think if we understand what are the problems and inequalities that the capitalist world bring us, that are the rules that are giving that inequity and that give the most extension of the inequality. When we see how to fix that, absolutely, in the first part is to get access to resources and all the resources that we understand that could be done to amplify the human potential and to start satisfying the basic human needs. When a person have access to water, have access to respect, have access to education, and have access to the minimal things that bring us human and that bring us the dignity, we start building over that. And when we use the technologies also to amplify the human potential, to amplify and to connect also the human potential with the relation of all the planetary needs that we are facing off, I think we are doing a good use of the technologies to support that improvement and that social well-being. But maybe it's a question about how to solve all that needs, the basic needs that we have as society, and maybe bring to the people the ways to start building their solutions, maybe giving them some autonomy to organize themselves, and also to start sharing and building, and maybe to build more platforms that help any people with any need in the world the right to access to solutions, the access to the things that usually also the local governments don't bring, because we have a lot of inequality on that way. But how to create also platforms that gives to the people that dignity and that needs that they have. So yeah, I think a way to understand this is how to transfer power, how to transfer resources, and also amplify the potential of the communities and the people to go over the needs and maybe to start building a more sustainable connections.
Barbara, you would like to add?
Yeah, I'm still hearing like idea of solarpunk technology in like how solarpunk technology can serve what's out there in terms of research and schools of thoughts and things that are happening to do that, improve social well-being and resolve social and economic problems of poor and low social economic contexts. And I wanted to share, if I may, again. I wanted to share one school of thought, of economic thought, that is trying to model what this could look like. And it feels really appropriate for this panel because, again, Kate Rodworth in Donut Economics developed a model called embedded economy. And here we are talking about Solarpunk, and the starting input for this economic model is that the first level is solar energy. And that has got to like mean something in a Solarpunk panel. So that the very first input of this economic model is solar energy, and at the end is heat. And I think that what's what Solarpunk ideas can do is show that these economic models that are showing different ways of how to tend the garden of the economy, how to reach a state of balance and of human thriving. What they can do is illustrate these kind of models where, so these are many words that we've said today, right? But you have solar energy coming into the planet Earth, useful for plants, but also useful for everything else because we need wood and we need all of the materials that come from this. And then we've talked about how that falls into a society and how things get traded in the market or get tended and accessed in the commons, get steered and governed by the state or shared among household members. And then all of this generates some form of waste and heat that leaves or doesn't leave fast enough the atmosphere. So how can ideas of solarpunk technology improve things? They can, I think, improve it by making these kinds of economic models and development thoughts be more visual, be more mainstream. And so, for example, they can show that solutions for social development that are not about, again, one technology, or that are about community ties, or that are about collaboration, or about market and state collaboration, because universities have developed respirators that were then sent to all the different locations where they were needed in various places of the world. These are things that happen under the pandemic, for example. Solarpunk technology can show that these things make sense and are desirable. If that's how I understood the question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing the graphic. That it just makes it so clear. Okay, so let's see. Let's check. Here's another question from Sillingerton. If we need to return to local or regional production for most commodities, how do we transition to that from regions where globalization has specialized the local production? So I guess having to think about that for a little bit. So I guess certain areas, actually, funny enough, Barbara, what you were saying earlier, I'm thinking about certain foods, are being created for some areas, and which is probably also contributing to the rise of food prices currently at the moment, given the global situation. So if we need to return to that kind of production, how do we do that while at the moment the globalization and capitalism, let's say as is, has forced certain local areas to specialize in things? How do we? Everyone's thinking about it. Barbara, you want to say something first?
I have a quick thought, actually. At least at the Internet of Production, the narrative is not around replacing global supply chains with local ones. It's around the absurdity that there are, right now, our delivery of manufactured good has only one model that people think makes sense, and everything else is anecdotal or happens under a crisis. So how we transition, for me, is not about like replacing the model. It's just about opening up all their alternatives. And how we do this is getting more of it done, but also creating that interconnectedness with the data protocols that it. So, very concrete example. I was recruiting someone to join the Internet of Production Alliance. This someone was a supply and purchasing specialist from UNFPA, the Food and Program, Population Program. Sorry, that's not the right term. UNFPA in Senegal when the pandemic hit. And she had no idea that they were makerspaces in Dakar. I was mentioning that I had visited some before. And I was explaining that one of the things we're trying to do is, for example, get machinery mapped and put accessible on any mapping platforms like Google Maps and every other one. But to get there, we need an underlying agreement on what the data protocols are for mapping a manufacturing location. And this means that the only thing that stopped this person who was in charge of purchasing things there during the pandemic is not having access to the knowledge of the things that are out there. So the way we transition is actually some very concrete, somewhat boring steps in which we just make it more visible that there is capacity out there, so that we don't like we have a new normal that includes the old normal, but just expands on it, and it makes it not seem like that's the only option out there.
Thank you. Martin?
This question, yeah, this question make me think about what are the problem, in fact. Yes, because maybe absolutely, I think is not when we talk about local production is not necessary to talk about how this local will replace the global production or the regional production, but maybe the things that we are fighting with this is the insecurity, the scarcity, the fragility of the systems of the local. When someone needs the right to access to something, usually they don't have the solutions or the resources to solve that. So the people are in a context of fragility when they have not the way to face a challenge properly. Of insecurity, when we talk about food, for example, how these problems comes to the people, and also the scarcity, and for sure maybe the local production and make strong the way to produce locally will as a way to create a more maybe an abundance context, maybe to go beyond the scarcity and to create abundance is part of the solution, to create also the security and also maybe the anti-fragile ecosystem that will help us to adapt and to build, but also to connect with global structures. Maybe we can see how as platforms we could go to a more distributed way, a more distributed world that brings us security, abundance, and anti-fragile ways to approach to the challenges we are facing.
Any thoughts to add, Star?
Yeah. I'm looking at the question a bit, and I'm thinking, unfortunately, the environment has started forcing this to happen, moving from specialized local production, because we've reached a point where some places the soil is depleted of nutrients and they absolutely cannot keep farming the cash crops they were doing, and so people really have to go back to what was native to that region, what could be planted there, because they cannot plant the cash crops anymore, unfortunately. And I think looking at this from an environmental point of view and basically just pushing for this, having to require, if you can, mandates for manufacturers to not push people to really plant something that they do, because right now a lot of companies kind of like squeeze regions into just planting this thing and really insisting that this is the only thing you can plant and this is the only thing we can subsidize. So I think one of the ways we can do it is move from that point of view, from that level of manufacturers dictating what happens, and move more to regulations that will bring it back, because unfortunately, like I said, the environment is kind of forcing it anyway. So it is something that needs to be solved at the moment.
Thank you. I think we have room for about 2 questions, to be honest. So I apologize to the folks that we didn't get to some of your questions. However, I do see a couple of things around fossil fuel questions or energy-based questions. Our next panels are on energy. So if you would like to take your questions to the next panel, that might be probably a more relevant space. So let me take couple of last 2 questions. Any ideas on how to engage more people in communities? How to build a narrative about cooperation, sharing knowledge, especially for free, so that they'll be interested in it and not show distrust? That's a great one.
Okay, I will answer that. Well, unfortunately, it depends on your society, the people there. And one thing I've noticed, especially in Eastern Europe, is when you mention community-based things, when you mention this kind of things, there's always like, ooh, oh, we went through this thing, we do not want to do it again. And so you have to show people like what is different in this, how is it going to help them. And that is the way you can change the narrative, basically finding out, okay, why is this something that people are resistant to, and slowly start showing them how it's different from that and how it's going to help them. And basically just bringing about the sense of mutual help, the sense of community. There are places where it's going to be a bit more difficult to do, but I think it can be done, and it can start just from people in the community talking about it, reaching out to groups and basically talking about those people, be it like, small groups of old people who hang around with each other, or going to the community centers and basically getting people to talk about it and slowly wearing down their resistance. I think that would be crucial, especially in Eastern Europe. But also showing that, knowledge sharing for free is not a bad thing, because it's drummed up into people that, oh, open source is bad, only like closed companies and all those things are good for you, and nothing for free is any good. And we have to change that mentality, and people have to see that there is value to be gained. And this whole locking of IP and patents to a point where innovation is difficult, people need to see this, to be taught about this, and to know that this is something that we can move away. And that will sort of build a narrative about this.
Barbara, Martin, anything you'd like to add?
Barbara, please.
No, I was taken to more of a personal thoughts. Like, I mean, people are sharing knowledge or sharing things for free all the time on social media, right? That's one context in which we're sharing, and we don't need a narrative about it. It's happening. How much of that is nudges and triggers and addiction is a question. We also see it happen in crisis situations. There's this like urge of like, if I don't do it, no one's going to do it, and or more like, if I don't do it, help isn't going to come from the outside. And there's a sense of reciprocity, either right now or in the future. These are my neighbors. So maybe ideas would come from looking at the contexts in which cooperation, knowledge sharing does happen. And the reason my thought went there was because I realized that my initial reflex was to think about tools to manipulate willingness to do such things. So like, give status or funding, or, and like, I can see we have this reflex of like finding a thing that we think is really good and trying to get people to do it. But there's got to be ideas out there in tapping into places where people are already willing to do things for free. Part of it has got to come from also just the financial and living situation to do these kind of things. It's a lot harder to spend time on doing things for free. If you need to work on a complete different other thing. So groups that came together to build supply materials during the pandemic also, come apart because people go back to their work and they did all of that. It was a volunteer thing, and then they move on. So yeah, those are just like thoughts out there, not specific ideas.
I think there is something that defines for me what get engaging and what engage people. That is, people believes in that in what they create. Yes, so this is super important in the approach also with communities, because usually we act with the classical top-down approach, bringing them on, we have a solution for you that will solve all your problems. And if people is not involved in the things that they need, people need to be involved to believe and to give trust about the things. So that comes back maybe of the concept to bring this the innovative solution that you want in a bottom-up approach, maybe in an emerging approach always, because in the other way will be authority again, will be top-down, will be a thing that maybe you can bring a solution and people will not have the knowledge, or maybe will think that will not don't know how to maintain that, and that will disappear. But for sure, it's a thing of empowerment, of inclusion, of involvement, and also involve the community in the design process is super important. Not separate the designers, the geniuses that are creating the solutions, and the community that is consuming and using and appropriating that solutions. So involve the people from the very beginning, engage them into the solutions, and also find the commons. Find the commons. The commons are the narrative, I think. The contexts are the narrative. And you can engage the people around that commons, around that common needs, and start building a regenerative way to solve their local and their context problems. So, it's maybe the key is that involve the people, make them part of the process, empower them also with the resources to maintain that, find the narrative, I think, as the local problem and the local needs, and be that emerging in a bottom-up approach with a regenerative and also emergence approach.
Thank you. Just again, I might reach. I've said it earlier on, but our fourth panel today, sort of towards the end, will be on narrative. So if you're interested in that, that will be a conversation on purely storytelling and narrative. Maybe just one last question. I'm so sorry that I couldn't get to all of them. Thank you so much for posting. Well, we've had a couple of questions that people ask for this, and for me, when two people ask for a thing, it's an important thing. Could we have some recommendations of books and additional readings from our panelists that they might recommend? Sorry to put you on the spot. I know this one's not the easiest one. Oh, here we go. Someone has already mentioned that in the chat, I think. Okay, Barbara, have you got any other recommendation, Barbara? And I know, Star, you look like you're thinking right now.
I think the one before last IPCC report, the adaptation one, probably. Like if you read the more extended version, apart from what Antonio Guterres called like the litany of lies and failures that have happened, there's a lot in it about what's already out there in terms of adaptation. I haven't personally read the thousands and thousands of pages that it is, but I know there are good examples in there as well of what people are doing right now. You can choose to create a solarpunk world in which none of the problems happen, in which case this might be a little bit less relevant. I don't know, but there's a lot of it, like use cases. So those use cases have got to be a really good source of inspiration. Sorry, because we're talking about books, I just connect the last two questions, the one you just asked them before. How do we get people to share information and where to find books? There are 300,000 libraries in the world. That's a community space in which to get the books and get people to share ideas.
Thank you so much. Martin, you have a thought on books you want to share?
Yes, I have maybe some provocation about that, but yes, we are talking about the Solarpunk, and for sure the first point to look some book recommendation are in the Solarpunk science fiction. Maybe you can look into some future fiction books that Francesco published, and for sure I think that's important because that will bring you the opportunity to create your utopia. So read something or inspire with something that bring you the opportunity to bring your utopia. What's the desirable that you want to build? And I'm for sure that will give you a purpose and also sense of what is the future that you are designing. But I think in terms also of a recommendation, but maybe as a mindset, I strongly recommend to explore biomimetics and bioinspirations. And what that means for maybe any kind of problem that we are facing in the world, in the society, in our short life as humans, was solved by the world in the entire life. So the bioinspiration and the biomimetics basically says, before starting to build a solution for something, ask the nature if maybe they don't have a solution for that. And maybe that is a thing that will inspire us to build all the technologies that we have. Be more bio-inspired, more biomimetic. Ask if how the nature faces the energy, how the nature faces the cooperativism, how the nature faces the diversity, what are the economic relations of the nature. I don't know, maybe all that ideas could bring you into mindsets that will shape everything that you will build. So maybe that's my recommendation as a mindset.
Star,
Wow.
any readings you'd like to share?
Oh, yeah. I would say Walk Away by Cory Doctorow and Makers. It sort of like tries to give a perspective on knowledge sharing and how it might look like in society. And when it comes to utopia related things, Ecotopia by Ernest Kallenbach. It shows that the ideas that we have right now have always been there, and people have always tried to imagine them, and so it gives an interesting perspective on what someone from the 70s imagined all this, how an ecotopia would look like. Well, that's it for me.
I would like to recommend a very, very big tome of a beautiful book called Low Tech, which has a catalogue of existing ideas on technologies by communities around the world. And yeah, I thought I knew things and I learned things. So that would be my recommendation. We're coming to the end of this panel. I am very grateful to our panelists, Star, Barbara, and Martin, for giving up their time just to talk about this with such passion and such expertise. Thank you so, so much. And thank you everyone for hanging around for all this time and joining into the discussion. So the next panel is, so I know we're all on different time zones, and trying to articulate this is a bit hard, but it's at 45 past the hour or 15 to the hour, depending on your cultural context of time and how that's described in your culture. So it's about in 15 minutes time. Okay, so again, just a reminder that the link to the next panel will be in the description of this stream, or you can also find it on the Eventbrite page, and that will be a panel on energy, and will be moderated by Francesco Verso. So we'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.